every battlefield and patriot's grave, to every heart and hearthstone, will swell when again touched, as surely there will be, by the better angels of our nature. But the war came. Now I had to switch hats, going from peacemaker to commander-in-chief. All this and still run the country. One of the things that took up my time were folks seeking government jobs, office seekers we called them. There was no end to them. They covered me like ants. Why, even when a current office holder would pass away, word would get out about him and they'd line up to fill up that open position. One morning I was accosted in the hallway in Washington. A fellow had heard about the death of a postmaster. He grabbed me by the arm and kept insisting, "Mr. President, you've just got to let me take his place." I said, "It's fine with me, but I'll have to check with the undertaker first." But the war was the first priority. In those days, there were thousands of people living in the North, but who sympathized with the South. These men had actually planned to assassinate me before I ever took the office of president. In order for me to travel from Springfield to Washington, I had to pass through Baltimore, where many of them lived. They had to sneak me through on a train in the middle of the night through Baltimore, slouched down in the seat without my top hat, so they wouldn't recognize a very tall man with a top hat as an easy target. Now that the war broke out, these same men had attacked Union troops on their way to protect the Capitol. When I got that news, I knew drastic measures had to be taken. So I had them all arrested and held without trial. In other words, I suspended habeas corpus. Now, since that was a constitutional issue, I wanted to meet with my cabinet before proceeding. Gentlemen, we are gathered here to discuss my plans to suspend habeas corpus. Now, the Constitution allows this during time of rebellion, but I want to get your opinion. Please indicate your vote by saying yea or nay. What say you, Secretary Seward? Nay. And you, Secretary of War, Stanton? Nay. Secretary of the Treasury, Chase? Nay. Attorney General Bates? Nay. Postmaster General Blair? Nay. Secretary of the Navy, Wells? Nay. And Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Smith? Nay. All right, gentlemen. The ayes have it. Gentlemen, these attackers are like mad dogs. Why, it reminds me of the story of this fellow who was walking down the lane with his pitchfork over his shoulder. The neighbor's dog ran out, mad dog, and ran out and attacked him. Well, the fellow had no choice but to kill the dog with the pitchfork. Well, now the neighbor comes running out, "Why'd you kill my dog?" "Well, why'd your dog attack me?" "Well, why couldn't you just fend him off with the blunt end?" "Well, why didn't your dog attack me with his blunt end?" Everyone was hoping for a short war. But my hopes along those lines were dashed when I saw my generals in action. And I mean in action. McClellan was the worst. He wouldn't fight. He didn't want to fight this war. What he really wanted was to be President of the United States. He proved that by running against me in 1864. Now, his plan, as I found out later, was to just have the armies march all over the country till they all got tired and then negotiate with the South, let them be their own country. He was trying to ride two horses at the same time, one of war and one of peace. I met with him near the battle lines in his tent once, and the meeting went like this. "Mr. President, we successfully engaged the enemy and then repositioned our forces 50 miles to the north." "Well, General, that's very good. Unfortunately, our objective lies to the south." He was always bragging about what a great military man he was, but I couldn't get him to engage the enemy. Words are cheap. I said he reminded me of the fellow who had this dog that he kept bragging about. He said this dog was the best wolf hunting dog ever. All day long would do nothing but hunt wolves. His friends finally invited him on a wolf hunt to see if the stories were true. Next morning, the hunting party crested the hill. The dog saw the wolves saw the dog, and off they ran. Well, they lost track of them through the woods, but when they come out on the other side, they saw an old man. They hollered out, "Have you seen him?" "Yep." "Well, what was their position?" "Well, last time I saw him, the dog was slightly ahead." You'll have to excuse my little stories. I've always tried to use humor to get me through even the most serious times. Sometimes that backfired. Once 2 women were overheard on a train. "Oh, I think the South will win because Jefferson Davis is a praying man." "Well, so's Abraham Lincoln," replied her friend. "I know, but God will think Abe is joking." Back to my problems. I had one general who would always send me telegraphs from headquarters in the saddle. I said, "That's your problem, General. You got your headquarters where your hindquarters should be." Once I telegraphed McClellan, "General, if you are not going to use your army, may I borrow it?" I finally had to fire him, and I hired this fellow. Ulysses S. Grant. Now, he could fight. Not only fight, but win. You can't argue with success. Oh, he had a reputation for drinking too much whiskey. But when that criticism would come up, I would say, "Find out what brand of whiskey this man drinks and send a barrel of it to my other generals." We were starting to make progress. In addition to General Grant, successes by General Meade, General Sherman, and General Sheridan, we were making progress, but not without great loss of life. In the end, over 600,000 men on both sides would lose their lives. I had to find a way to finish the war, but stop the bloodshed. I was being criticized all along about my policy, or as some would say, I had no policy. In fact, Horace Greeley, the editor of the most famous newspaper in the country, published an article saying just that. He said, "Well, you ought to just free the slaves. You're backing away from your promise to do that." Now, folks, I may walk slowly, but I never walk backwards. What Horace Greeley didn't know is I already had a draft of the Emancipation written when I wrote him a letter in return. Dear Mr. Greeley, as to my policy, if I could save the Union by freeing none of the slaves, I would do it. If I could save the Union by freeing some and freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save the Union by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that. I have here stated my official policy, not to be confused with my oft-expressed opinion that I wish all men to be free everywhere. Well, shortly after replying to Mr. Greeley, I decided it was time to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, folks, this document is one of the most misunderstood documents in history. It was used under the War Powers Act. It was military strategy, not a moral decision on this case. The Constitution allowed me to confiscate enemy property. And all along, the South was saying that those slaves were property, and it was that property I was confiscating. This emancipation did not free any slaves in the border states. There were slave-holding border states who were loyal to the Union, and I did not want those border states to leave the Union now. This emancipation did not apply to those slaves. I was willing to put my wish that all men everywhere be free on hold for the moment. As I said, the priority was to save the Union. I thought that the idea of thousands of slaves taking up arms for the Union Army would shock the South into laying down their arms and ending this rebellion. And in the end, make no mistake, the emancipation was a military decision, and it helped the Union win. 1863, in the summer, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought and won by Union General Meade. But again, great losses. 8,000 killed in 2 days. In the fall, I was invited to give a speech as part of a dedication to the cemetery that was to be there. All this loss of life, what would I say? What could I say?
Now, in the midst of a tragic war not yet won, a lot of folks gather at Gettysburg for a dedication. And among them is the President. He looks older now, seldom smiles. War has been so long, so many dead on both sides. After a while, after the main speaker, he has a few words to say.
Fourscore, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived, so dedicated, can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come here to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place to those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Those brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, rather, the living, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work that those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task that lies before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause to which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, undergo a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Not only did I have to deal with the rising casualty counts on a daily basis, I also had to deal with the situation where, on certain occasions, Union soldiers, out of fear, would run from the battle lines and now faced a firing squad. I was always trying to find ways to pardon them. Sometimes it was all too easy. Dear Secretary of War Stanton, as to the 14-year-old waiting to be shot, let us spank this 14-year-old drummer boy and send him home to his mother. Well, in 1865, General Sherman finished his horrific yet successful march to the sea. General Grant took Vicksburg, giving the Union Army full control of the Mississippi, then went on to defeat the Confederate Army in Chattanooga. And with rising casualties, Richmond finally fell, which forced General Lee to surrender at Appomattox. Now it was time for healing.